the opponents of Hasidism, and nobody really wants to be called an opposer, an opponent, something who against something. You want to be known as something that you were for, and not something you're against. But the other reason is simpler, that the Muslims are no longer opposed to Hasidism. They have different views, different ways of life, different ideology, but they don't really fight Hasidism. So there are no
Hay
longer.
algunos que tienen
Sí, yo
prendido el micrófono.
los voy a apagar.
José Román.
Ahí está. Listo.
Litvaks or Yeshivish Jews. So let's start with the Hasidim. In the previous lesson, we talked about Moses Mendelssohn and the beginning of Jewish Enlightenment in Central Europe. That was the 18th century. And we can ask ourselves now, we talked about the emancipation in Central Europe, Emperor Joseph II, who gave the Toleranz patent, the tolerance decree in 1781. And we can ask ourselves the very expectable question, what happened in Eastern Europe at that time? Eastern Europe was no emancipation, there was no process of modernization, so at least not as fast as it was in Western and Central Europe. And the Jews, what was their fate in Eastern Europe at that time? Actually, there was not much changing in terms of modernization, but there was a huge change in the political and social status of the Jews, and also in the religious movements that developed there. So first of all, just to make it clear, in what year did the Jews of Eastern Europe their emancipation, officially? Far later. Actually, it was 1917. It was just, wasn't in the Bolshevik Revolution. There was another revolution in Russia in February of 1917, and at that time, Jews first time received their equal rights. Before that, Jews did not have equal rights in the Russian Empire and in the so we're talking about...
בני, אתה יכול לחזור עוד פעם על האינפורמציה? לא נשמע טוב, נקטע קצת. ממתי קיבלו את שוויון זכויות?
So Jews received their equal rights in Russia in 1917, not in the Bolshevik Revolution, but in another revolution that preceded the Bolshevik Revolution and took place in February of 1917. That was called the Liberal Revolution in Russia. They didn't topple the Tsar, but put another government that liberalized the political system. By the way, the prime minister was already Jewish. Once again, only 1970. So the question is, what development can the Jewish communities go through in that period when there's no emancipation, no equal rights? Jews, by the way, are limited. What is called the Pale of Settlement.
¿Está partido? ¿Se escucha o está partiéndose?
No se escucha, se está
No se escucha.
Se está partiendo todo el sonido.
כן, הסאונד לא טוב, הסאונד לא טוב, אני לא יודע למה.
בוא ננסה לבדוק, רק שנייה אחת.
Marcos, la semana pasada que le dijiste que se alejara del micrófono ayudó bastante.
Sí, yo también pienso lo mismo, creo que es un asunto del micrófono.
Sí, coméntale eso.
Sí.
עכשיו יותר טוב?
כן, בני, אני חושב שהבעיה זה שאתה מתקרב למיקרופון.
אז להישאר רחוק,
כן,
בסדר.
אם אתה נשאר רחוק זה נשמע.
בסדר גמור. Okay, so during the late 18th and 19th century, the Jews were allowed to live only in a limited area called the Pale of Settlement. They were not allowed to live in the cities of Russia, so unless they get a very special permission that was given only to rich Jews that the government needed them. But there was almost no Jews in places like Moscow and St. Petersburg and other main cities of Russia. Jews lived in rural and countryside areas and small towns of Eastern Europe. So what could happen if there is no enlightenment, at least only beginnings of enlightenment in the 18th century, and no equal rights? What was interesting in the life of the Jews at that time? So first of all, we should know that in Poland and Lithuania, the area of Poland and Lithuania, there used to be a great state called the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth that existed for centuries, and the Jews had a representative body in that Commonwealth, in that republic, which was called Vad Arba Aratzot, the Committee of the Four Countries. Four countries, four different regions of that area, sent delegates, sent representatives, and they were actually the supreme body, political and rabbinic body of the Jews of Eastern Poland, Lithuania. Vad Arba Aratzot, the Committee of the Four Countries, was dismantled in 1764. So since then, there was no one central body for the Jews of Eastern Europe. That is the first crisis that Eastern European Jewry went through. Another crisis was the condition of the rabbinate and the communities on the whole. The rabbinate was in a very bad condition in that time because in order to get a rabbinate position, people had actually to pay money, and it was actually a kind of bribery for the community. This is how they got their position. And there was no respect for the rabbis and no respect for the community, and many communities really were getting worse in every possible term. The other crisis that was going on in the same period was not for the Jews, but for the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth of Poland itself. Poland actually was beginning a series of partitions. Poland was a country weakened, got weaker and weaker at that time, and as you know, Poland is surrounded by three main superpowers in terms of that time. One is Russia, one is Prussia, which it was later to become Germany, and the other is Austria. And both of them actually felt that Poland was weak and decided on actually taking parts of Poland step by step until eventually they really decided that they take all of Poland for themselves, and the main part was occupied by Russia, a smaller part by Austria, and another small part by Prussia, which once again is the German state, main German state of that time. So Poland actually ceased to exist at that time. Short after that, Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon conquers Eastern Europe, and Eastern Europe goes through changes again. And after Napoleon falls in 1815, there started the period of restoration, the restoration of Europe to the pre-revolutionary condition. That is what they hoped to do. And then at that time, they returned Poland into a state of partition, no longer independent. Poland didn't get its independence until after the First World War. So the Jews actually didn't live in new countries under the Russian rule, some of them Prussian rule, and others are under Austrian rule. So the whole condition of Eastern European Jewry was dependent on that. But this is all in terms of politics, in terms of, kind of social political history. What interests us is here, and it's related to all those developments, is, the religious development. And the most important thing is that in the time that in Western Europe we see Mendelssohn and the Enlightenment and opening to modern philosophy and arguing about the basics of Judaism and in terms of modern philosophy, in Eastern Europe the condition was altogether different. The main doctrine that ruled in the Jewish culture was Kabbalah, which is a mystical doctrine, not philosophy. They were not much open to the Western new trends in philosophy. Kabbalah was ruling, and within the world of Kabbalah, there came a new movement, which is Hasidism. And according to what Martin Buber said once, actually, Hasidism turned the Kabbalah into practice. It made it something that is accessible for the masses, for the multitudes, for the people. But in truth, it was not exactly like that. And actually, when we ask ourselves what was the new gospel, not gospel, but Sorah of Hasidism, if we want to analyze it, what was the new idea that Hasidism came with, it's not exactly what people think. If you ask someone in the street, I know I'm well-educated Jew. I'm not speaking about people who don't know Jewish history, but people who are actually familiar with what was the innovation of Hasidism. What was the main idea of Hasidism? I think most of you would say as well, Hasidism was about loving every Jew, bringing every Jew closer to the Avodat Hashem, trying to make every Jew happy, the idea of gladness, of joy, simcha, things like that. And this is true for later Hasidism. But if we're talking about, and the popularity of Hasidism became much greater, much broader in the 19th century. But if we want to trace back the essence of Hasidism as it was in its outset, in its beginnings, in the 18th century, it's an absolutely different thing. Not absolutely, but quite a different thing. Hasidism was a part of the Kabbalistic world, and most of the Hasidic rabbis were Kabbalists, and who took the Kabbalah into some interpretation, which I'll talk about in a second, some new, innovative interpretation of the Kabbalah. But the main thing was not just being in simcha and joy, not just in going to the people. The main idea was to try to make as many people as possible get or reach a mystical experience. And when I'm speaking about mystical experience, it is not something that you can deliver to the masses. It's not something that Shmuel, the shoemaker, and Bel, the tailor, can really have very easily. A mystical experience is something that you have to really understand the mystical doctrine of Kabbalah and have special capacities, mental capacities, in order to get that. And not every Shmuel and Bel can do that. Now, what am I talking about when I speak about mystical experience, and why do I say that it's related to the Kabbalah? I'll just say a few words about that, and then I'll listen to your questions. If some of you might have read some books on Kabbalah, the main idea of Kabbalah is that God is, first of all, the preliminary, the first a source of the world is what is called in Kabbalah Ein Sof. Ein Sof is God in its transcendent, inaccessible, ununderstandable, unperceivable aspect. It's like we know in the Rambam that you can't say you can't attribute any property to God, any attribute to God. God is inaccessible, not understandable, indivisible. That is Ein Sof of the Kabbalah. But unlike the philosophers, unlike Rambam and others, the Kabbalists believe that this Ein Sof has a light. Light meaning Or Ein Sof. And this light flows from Ein Sof down and down and becomes more and more accessible, more and more tangible, more and more understandable, until the lowest part of this divine light is our world, the lowly world, as the Kabbalists call it, Olam HaShafel. This is the world in which we live. So the whole idea of Kabbalah is actually explaining to us all the worlds that the divine light goes through, and all the tools, as they call it, sfirot, kelim, in which the divine light comes down and becomes more and more accessible. So the Kabbalists explain to us how some parts of the divine light are in the line of chesed, an endless flow of divine light without any limits, without any constraints. And another part of divine light is din, which is the nature and the order, and everything is in limitation, in constraints. And another line is the combination of both of them. And so on and so forth, all kinds of forms in which divine light goes down and actually is revealed to us. That is the whole idea of Kabbalism, of Kabbalistic worldview. Now, when the Baal Shem Tov comes, Baal Shem Tov, by the way, I'll say a few words about the Baal Shem Tov. This is the first time I mention him. He's considered as the founder of Hasidism. When he comes, he doesn't have any students, any teachers who don't know who was his teacher or where it is teachers. He comes as a very simple person, somewhere in the Carpathians in Ukraine, and he comes and with a very, very simple idea. He says, yes, the Kabbalistic worldview is correct. I believe in it just as you do. But beyond and above all that very complicated system of these powers and this world and these kelim and this field and all that intricated worldview, we have to remember a very simple thing. All of it is divine light. And divine light is an entire unity without divisions, without partitions, without anything in it. And even this world, when you see the light, or the sun, or the moon, or me, or you, or the book, or the bookshelf, or the table, or the chair, it's all one thing. It's divine light. And all you have to do in order to get the correct understanding of the world is just going with your thought behind all this illusion of seeing our world. Our world is an illusion. And going behind this illusion and see that all one, all forms of one divine light, which is the light of God. And this is the plain idea of Hasidism. And it seems very simple, but actually it's very difficult because according to Baal Shem Tov, you really have to train yourself and go through an experience until you really see nothing but divine light and see everything as divine light, including your own self. Yes, imagine that. If you see yourself as something separate from God, you don't understand God as unity because there's me and there is God. You have to really actually negate yourself, annihilate yourself until you're all swallowed within the divine light. And this is what the Hasidim call in a wordplay in Hebrew to turn the ani into ein. Ani is the letters is from the letters Aleph, Nun, Yud. To turn it into ein, the letters Aleph, Yud, Nun. The same letters. Make the ego nothing. Make the ego, turn the ego into nothing. In what sense? In sense of being nothing because you're swallowed in the unity of God. No separations, no distinctions, no me and you, no me and God, everything is one. This is the main idea of early Hasidism. And before we go to the text, this is time for you to ask questions or make comments if you're interested.
בני, איך זה מתקשר עם החוויה הזאת שאתה מדבר, של המיסטית? איך המחשבה הזאת של אור השם בכל מקום, או אור אחד, מתקשר לחוויה המיסטית שאתה מדבר?
זו החוויה המיסטית. החוויה המיסטית זה להפסיק, the mystical experience is, this is the mystical experience. The mystical experience is not to see anymore a physical world, not to see any plurality, but feel yourself and the world and God as one unity without distinctions, without divisions. That's the mystical experience. We'll see, in a moment we can see descriptions of this mystical experience.
לפי דעתך, המחשבה, כל השיטה הזאת, זה לפי הרמב"ם יכול להתחשב ככופרות בגלל שמדברים על הגשמת הבורא? Le estoy preguntando al profesor, אם אתה רוצה לחזור את השאלה באנגלית ולענות?
אפשר. Rabbi Mordechai, Rabbi Marcos asked me if how would the Rambam treat this doctrine? Wouldn't it be a kind of heresy in the eyes of the Rambam? Yes, it would be considered as heresy, but not because it treats God as physical thing. That's one problem. But above all, because it really erases the boundary between man and God. In Maimonides, there is a strong boundary. Man is one, God is another. God is absolutely transcendent to the world. Here, God is not transcendent. God is immanent to the world, is within the world, is accessible in everything in the world. Yes, it's also, as you said, it's also the physicality of God as well. God is everything, including the physical world. Yes, absolutely. So there. So to get
יש שאלה, דינה, בכבוד.
בבקשה.
Shalom, shalom. I was wondering if this conception of unity is not very close to the main idea of Baruch Spinoza.
Oh, that's a very, I mean, this requires a long discussion. Many people have tried to compare Spinoza with Hasidism, actually also with Kabbalah. Spinoza himself, by the way, wrote that Kabbalah is a piece of nonsense. That's how I call that. He didn't respect Kabbalah. Now, it depends very much on how you interpret Spinoza. Spinoza himself is often considered as a pantheist. Pantheist means that everything is God, indeed, true.
And everything is a unity.
Everything is in unity. Of course, God is one, so everything is unity. And not only that, but God is the infinite substance. It calls God the infinite substance. So infinity and sof. So it really comes close to Spinoza in some pieces. But there are many interpretations. I will only tell you my understanding of Spinoza, and I've been learning Spinoza and teaching Spinoza. So there are different interpretations. The question is whether you consider Spinoza as pantheist or panentheist. And the difference is whether the world is in God or the world is the same with God. Pantheism says that the world is the same with God. Panentheism means that there is something transcendent beyond this world, which is God as well. Now, I am one of those who understand Spinoza, and it's not clear-cut, and there are controversies about that. But I understand Spinoza as pantheist, which means God is equal to nature. God is equal to nature is actually not a believing doctrine, but a form of atheism. Because if you equate God to the world, you say, I actually don't need the word God, there is the world. In Spinoza's terms, Deus sive natura, in Latin. Deus sive natura, the Latin phrase they always quote it, but as you know, Spinoza says God, which means nature, or in other words, nature. If God is, in other words, nature, in every place that Spinoza writes God, you can actually read nature. So as there is nature and not God. So in this term, I'm one of those who interprets Spinoza as an atheist, and therefore it's not the same as Hasidism. He uses the word God every time, but he uses the word God, but actually means nature, and that's why I understand Spinoza as an atheist, and of course, Hasidism is not atheism.
Professor Daniel Feinstein.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Professor Benjamin Brown. I read some of your books and are wonderful, so kol hakavod. The person who make a connection between Moses Mendelssohn and the Baal Shem Spinoza was the Rav Kook. In a very interesting fragment, the Rav Kook said that the rabbis of the community of Amsterdam were right when they excommunicate Spinoza because he made confusions with a very important principle, but he said, the process of purification of these ideas began by Rabbi Moses Mendelssohn, that's how he called him, and then without knowing that, the one who make the whole purification of the wrong idea for Spinoza was the Baal Shem Tov, because he took his ideas not from outside sources, but for inner sources. So in this short fragment, the Rav Kook said, and when the time came that all the purification of this idea will come, he will not be again Mekulal, ela he will be blessed again.
Baruch.
Baruch.
Wow.
Which is his name.
Wow.
Yes, exactly. Yes. No, Baruch ela Baruch, yes. And yes, it's a wordplay as well, right? Yes, that's correct. And actually, Rav Kook said that Spinoza was wrong in a very small point, but this is a critical point, which is exactly where it differs from the Rambam, whether or not God is a part of nature or beyond nature, or a part of nature, and includes or doesn't includes the physical world as well. Thank you. And now, I didn't say a word about the Baal Shem Tov and his history and the controversies in research about him. We'll keep that into a few minutes later. Now, I would like to read the text, two texts with you to just show a little bit of this. Of course, oops, I see that. I'll summarize it in my own words, but just a minute, but some texts are required. Here, do you see this?
No.
Do you see the text? No?
No.
No.
Okay, I'll try again. Sorry. No. רק שנייה אחת. כן, שנייה. For some reason I can't see it here. Just a minute. Yes, here it is. Okay. Can you see the text?
Yes.
Okay. You're supposed to have it as well. I'll start with text number 2. Rabbi Yaakov Yosef Mipolna, which is the main student of the Baal Shem Tov, who actually delivers his teachings, his sayings to us, the first actual author of Hasidism, gives us here's in his second book, which is actually the second book that was published of Hasidic doctrines. He gives us the following parable, משל. ממורי זכרו לחיי העולם הבא. משל שאמר קודם תקיעת שופר. It's a parable he said before blowing the shofar on ראש השנה. שהיה מלך אחד חכם גדול ועשה באחיזת עיניים חומות ומגדלים ושערים. וציווה שילכו אצלו דרך השערים והמגדלים. Now there was a very wise king. When the Baal Shem Tov says wise, he means, mystical wise. He was a very wise king, and he did by illusion. By illusion, achizat einayim, illusory means, he made walls and towers and gates. Which means, now imagine to yourself a kind of castle, illusionary castle. And this castle is built from many concentric walls surrounding each other, and each wall has its towers and its gates, but it's all illusion. It's all illusory. This king built an illusory world of concentric walls. And וציווה שילכו אצלו דרך השערים והמגדלים. And he made a decree, an order, that the people from outside, his nation, his people, will come through the gates into the walls. So people from the outside, his people, start coming. Now there is kind of וציווה לפזר בכל שער ושער אוצרות המלך. And he ordered that in each gate on the way, they'll put treasures of the king. Now, the people come in and go through the gates and see the treasures. ויש שהלך עד שער אחד וחזר. ויש וכולי. One person went until the first gate and found the treasure, took the treasure and went home. Another one went to the inner gate, in another gate closer to the king. The king is in the middle of the castle, yes? So another came a little closer to the king and found a greater treasure and went back home. Another went even further, etc., etc. Who didn't suffice with that? עד שבנו ידידו של המלך, התאמץ מאוד שילך אל אביו המלך. אז ראה שאין שום מחיצה מפסיק בינו לבין אביו, כי הכל היה אחיזת עיניים. Which is splendid, a splendid parable. He says, one person went to the first gate, took the treasure, went home. The other inner gate, took another treasure, went back home. A third, etc. But the son of the king's son, he didn't want to go to the gates and take treasures. He wanted to come into the castle to see what? To meet with his father. Now, when he comes into the center of the castle and sees and is together with his father, what does he see? He sees that it's all an illusion, because he stands in the point where his father stands, and from where his father stands, he sees that everything is an illusion. והנמשל מובן, and the meaning of the message of the parable is understandable, ודברי פי חכם חן, and that's the end of the quote. Now, what is the parable? What is the message of the parable? What would you suggest as interpreters of the parable? He says here, so we can understand, if those of you understand the Hebrew can read it, but try to understand what's the meaning of this parable. What are the walls? What are the gates? What are the treasures? How do you understand it?
All the world.
I think that
Right.
it's very clear.
Well,
So, שאפשר להגיע אין מחיצות באמת, רק פיקטישן.
The idea is that if you get I would say the glasses of God Himself, you see that this world is just an illusion, and all the plurality of the world is just an illusion, and even the entire Kabbalistic system that speaks about Sfirot and Olamot and all that is just an illusion. An illusion, why? Because it's all God, it's all one and the same thing, it's all one God. And what is the call? What is I would say the practical message of this parable? That we all have to be like the Son, which means to go into the King's place and see the world from the King's point of view. We have to look at the world from God's perspective, which is quite, I would say, shocking. We have to look at the world as if there is no room, no walls, no gates, no books, no pillars, no nothing, no tables, no chairs. It's all one God. This is what we have to do. And I return to the text, and he says, וכן כתבתי במקום אחר מה ששמעתי ממורי זכרו לחיי העולם הבא, כי בידיעת האדם שהשם יתברך מלוא כל הארץ כבודו, וכל תנועה ומחשבה הכל ממנו יתברך, אז בידיעה זאת התפרדו כל פועלי האבן וכו'. אם כן, כל המלאכים וכל ההיכלות, הכל נברא ונעשה כביכול מעצמותו יתברך, כעדין קמצא ללבושי מיני ובי. ובידיעה זו התפרדו כל פועלי האבן שאין שום מחיצה או מסך מבדיל בין האדם ובינו יתברך. In other words, I wrote in some other place that God is melo kol haaretz kvodo. The entire world the entire earth is full of His glory. This is the verse, this is the pasuk that the Hasidim always use. Melo kol haaretz kvodo. Kol tnua, every motion, every thought, everything is God Himself. Now, when you put this into your mind, בידיעה זו, in your mind, התפרדו כל פועלי האבן. מה זה התפרדו כל פועלי האבן? It returns to another doctrine, which is also a very sharp thing. What is the source of the evil in our world? If everything is God, so where comes the evil to this world? The Kabbalists say that evil is klipot, is piles of the divine light that fell from the creation of the world. Let's not get into that, but it all exists because there is a divine spark that gives the klipot its source of living. Now it says the Baal Shem Tov, if you see everything as divine light, even the sparks go back and are united into the divine light. So there's no source for the evil. The evil can live only if it has some source in the holy light of God. And even when you take that light away, because everything is part of God, so the evil cannot exist anymore, and you actually annihilate the evil as well in the world, which is also a very sharp idea. So now that we see that, let's see another quotation let's give it. But there are descriptions of how you get this mystical experience that you go. Baal Shem Tov says it's all in the mind. It's all a mental power. Koach HaMachshava, the force of thought. Thought gives you the way to go up from one world to another until you feel really dissolved within God. It's quite amazing that a man like the Baal Shem Tov comes, and later on his followers and his students, and this becomes an entire movement. How does it happen? In that, regarding to that question, there is a controversy between scholars, and actually between Hasidism itself and the scholars and academic scholarship. The Hasidim say that the Baal Shem Tov started off as a simple person. Actually, he worked in the source of most of this knowledge is, by the way, a book called Shivcha Baal Shem Tov that was published as late as 1815. Now, let's remember Baal Shem Tov died in 1760. So actually, the book was published more than 50 years after his passing, much, much later. But it brings some Hasidic traditions. According to these traditions, Baal Shem Tov was first, the first half of the Baal Shem Tov's life was what they call itkasya. He was hidden, he was concealed. He didn't show himself to the world. And then he lived as a simple person, as a guard of the Bet Midrash, and as a helper of the in the kindergarten, in the cheder, and things like that simple Jews did. And only that at the age of 35 or 36, he was known to, and even then he was a mystic, but nobody knew. But in the age of 36, that is around 1736, he was born around 1700. At the age of 36, more or less, somehow people discovered him. And there are a few stories how they discovered him. And since then, he started speaking and teaching and trying to bring as many people as possible under his influence. And this is the period of the Hasidim called the Idgalia. He became revealed. At the beginning is concealment, and here it's a period of revelation. And now, since this period, he became the leader of a group, and this group grew and grew and became a movement, and so on, so forth. That's a Hasidic description. And after he died, after he passed away, his main student, his main disciple, Rav Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mezrich, yes, the preacher of Mezrich, he became the leader instead of him, and he sent his students, his disciples throughout Eastern Europe, and they disseminated Hasidism and became a movement. This is the Hasidic story. And in recent scholarship, there are a few question marks about this story. First of all, it's not clear that the Baal Shem Tov had such a break between the first period of his era and the other period of his era. Probably it was revealed more gradually. Okay, that's not so important. But some scholars say that actually Baal Shem Tov not only, first of all, was not a leader of movement, because the Hasidism was not a movement in his time. It was only Chavura, a small group of people. And even that small group of people, some scholars say that he wasn't a leader. He was a member of this group, maybe a very prominent member, but not even a leader of the group. And after he passed away, the Maggid was not his successor, because there was nothing to succeed, or there was nothing to get. There was no leadership, was no group identity, was no movement. So the Maggid actually was also one among a few leaders. Some of them were his students, some of his pupils, but mainly other members of the same. And only later on, only after the Hasidim meet some opposition, they become a group, with a movement with a doctrine, with a social identity, with a social framework. And then only then at the 1770s, they became a movement. Now, if you're asking me, by the main scholar who actually, two scholars who represent this analysis, are Professor Moshe Rossman, who discovered very interesting documents in Eastern Europe. He actually discovered the registration of the names of the Jews in the estate of the Polish noblemen. that was the owner of the lands of that area. And he found out that the Baal Shem Tov is written in this registration of names, he written as Israel Baal Sam, Baal Shem, Doctor Mysticus, a magical doctor, because he cured people. Actually, in his second part of his life, he used his mystical powers to cure people, to help people, to be a healer. So he is written as Doctor Mysticus, and also it's written there that he got his house from the community, which means, Osman says, that he wasn't an opposition, a revolutionary. He was a part of the establishment. He was a part of the community. But also Professor Ada Rappaport Albert of London, who in these days she's struggling with a bad sickness, and may God send her good health. She wrote in a very famous article that actually there are many, even according to the Hasidic story, there are many people who are equals to Baal Shem Tov and argue with him, and that they didn't see him as his teacher. So this analysis tells us that in the Baal Shem Tov's time, at least, there was no Hasidic movement, and that is something I think they prove quite convincingly. On the other hand, I think they are much less convincing regarding the period after the Baal Shem Tov's passing, because here we do see some group that identifies itself as the Baal Shem Tov's Talmidim, the Baal Shem Tov's pupils, and not only that, during the years after Baal Shem Tov's passing, the Maggid of Mezrich does become the main figure in this group and does become a leader of movement. So I don't agree with Osman and Ada Rappaport regarding, I do agree, sorry, about the period of the Baal Shem Tov. Mostly, with some small differences, I agree with them. But regarding the period after the Baal Shem Tov, I think this is the critical period in which the Hasidic movement did become a movement with the main leader, which is the Maggid of Mezrich. But let's not argue about that. This is, I would say, nuances that scholars are eager to argue about. But now we're asking ourselves the question, how did the Baal Shem Tov come into this idea of disseminating this new innovation to the world? Here, as I said before, most of the doctrines of the Baal Shem Tov are known to us through the books of his disciples, his students, Yaakov Yosef of Polna, which we read before. But there are very few texts that the Baal Shem Tov himself wrote, and we know that we have them. One of them, the longest of them, is a letter that he wrote to his brother-in-law, who made Aliyah to Eretz Israel. His brother-in-law, Gershon, made Aliyah in the 1740s, and Baal Shem Tov sends him letters, and the two of these letters combined one, and it is known as one letter, is called Igeret HaKodesh, or Igeret Aliyat HaNeshama, which is a fascinating text. Let's read it. This is text number 1. כי בראש השנה שנת תק"ז, he says, עשיתי השבעת עליית הנשמה, כידוע לך, וראיתי דברים נפלאים במראה, מה שלא ראיתי עד הנה מיום עומדי על דעתי. He said, in the Rosh Hashanah of the year 1746, I made השבעת עליית הנשמה. I adjured my soul to go up in the upper worlds, a mystical experience that is describes here. And I saw things that I've never seen before in the upper worlds. He really is a mystic. מה שלא ראיתי עד הנה מיום עומדי על דעתי. I've never seen before. And what I say, won't read all the text. What I saw there, I can't even tell. No human language can describe that. And I went into the upper paradise, upper Gan Eden, and saw things. And then I saw souls of Jewish people coming and asking me to rectify them, to improve them, to let them give them some way to help them. To rectify them, make them better. And I helped them, and I used my teacher, which is my teacher, we know from other sources, is Achia Shiloni, the prophet from the Bible, is his teacher in the upper worlds, to go up into the upper worlds, etc., etc. And then I saw some very bad news that Jews will will be persecuted and will convert. And I didn't know what is all this joy about. They were so joyous up there. I was so happy. I thought maybe they're happy that I'm going to pass away because I was in the upper world, so maybe I'm not returning to this world. But then I told no, we want to get back to this, to the lower world, because it is good for the upper world that you work with human beings and not with us. So all of this drama here with Baal Shem Tov in the upper world ends with an even greater drama when he says, and here I'm going to this part, עליתי מדרגה אחר מדרגה עד שנכנסתי להיכל המשיח. I went one step after the other until I reached the hall of the Mashiach. Yes, שם לומד המשיח תורה עם כל התנאים והצדיקים עם שבעה רועים. There, Mashiach studies Torah with all the תנאים and the tzadikim. He studies Torah with them. שם ראיתי שמחה גדולה, so great joy, great שמחה. He didn't know what's the simcha about, what's this joy about. Okay, so then he meets face to face with Mashiach. So what do you ask the Mashiach when you meet him face to face? Of course, מתי התימה? מתי כבודו מגיע? When are you coming? And Mashiach tells him, and here is the text, is the key of the drama. Look at this. ושאלתי פי משיח, מתי התימה? When are you coming? והשיב לי, and he answered me, בזאת תדע, you should know this. בעת שהתפרסם לימודך ויתגלה בעולם, ויפוצו מעיינותיך החוצה, מה שלימדתי אותך והשגת, ויוכלו גם הם לעשות ייחודים ועליות כמוך, אז יכלו כל הקליפות ויהיה את רצון וישוע. When your teachings, where your doctrine will be dispersed, disseminated in the world, and all of them, all the world, meaning all the Jews, all the public will know how to make these mystical actions like you, reach upper worlds like you, and make all those unifications of the divine forces like you, then it will be a time of redemption, a time of salvation, and the Messiah will be able to, I'll be able to come. The forces of evil will dismantle, and I'll be able to come. When all of the Jews will be able to be mystics like you. Stunning. Imagine that. So what would you think if Mashiach told you, yes, I can come, but only if all of them are mystical figures like in your level? The Baal Shem Tov says, ותמדתי על זה, והיה לי צער גדול באריכות הזמן כל כך, מתי זה אפשר להיות? I was really wondrous about it. When can that happen? I was sorry for that. Because I knew that it's unachievable. You can't achieve it. That make all the people mystics. So I was sorry about it, and I was wondering about it. When that is possible to become true. And you can say that from this point on, Hasidism chooses the way of actually a kind of hierarchy between tzaddikim and the lay people. Tzaddikim in the early Hasidic doctrine are people who can reach that peak, can reach that mystical experience. But since not everybody can do that, as the Baal Shem Tov says here, what's the solution? If you can't really attach yourself to God, the attachment to God is called in the Hasidic language dvekut. If you cannot reach the dvekut yourself, and only a few tzaddikim can do that, what is your alternative? What is your path to God? You attach yourself to the tzaddikim who attach themselves to God, and this way you are attached to God. Now, all of you are here kind of amazed to hear that, because we all grew about when we were already in elementary school. Teachers always told us Judaism is not about mediation to God. Christianity is about mediation to God. In Jews, there is no mediation. It's you and God, and nothing in the middle. And here we see a conception of mediation. Yes, the tzaddik is a mediator between man and God, and this is a part of the Hasidic doctrine. And since this stage, Hasidism is very much about tzaddikism, about tzaddikim and the attachment to tzaddikim and the courts of tzaddikim, and all the ceremonies that Hasidim do are forms of attachment to the tzaddikim. They give them kvitels and ask their permissions to make a business and to marry this woman and not another, and to marry your son to that woman, not another, and the tzaddik gives you, the Rebbe gives you all the formulas of how to do this and how to do that, and what's the nosach of your prayer. Everything is according to the tzaddik, and you go to the tzaddik's Shabbos table, which is the tish, yes, the Shulchan Shabbat of the tzaddik, the tish, and there you sing, and then you try to attach yourself to the tzaddik, and you follow the tzaddik, and you have the picture of the tzaddik in your mind. And in some Hasidic groups, you have to think about the tzaddik when you immerse in the mikveh, and even when you sleep with your wife, you have the figure of the tzaddik in your mind. In everything, in every part of your life, you have to bear the tzaddik in mind. The tzaddikim are the center of the Hasidic life. Yes, and here you can ask questions.
What means that he did Aliyat Neshama?
Aliyat Neshama means the ascension of the soul. Now, what do you understand in the ascension of the soul? The soul goes, according to Rabbi, there are 4 worlds until you get in Sof. Asiyah, Yetzirah, Bria, Ve'atzilut. 4 different levels of worlds. So, if you read if you pray from old Sephardi prayer books, old Sephardi Sidurim, you can see that the first part of Tfilat Shacharit is Tfilat Asiyah, then the brachot before Kriyat Shema is Tfilat Yetzirah, then Tfilat Bria, then Tfilat Atzilut, which is Tfilat Atzilut. It's all Kabbalistic words. So in the process of getting a mystical experience, you go through this word, another word, until you go to the uppermost word, which is Olam Atzilut, and then you can dissolve all together and negate your existence. So Aliyat Neshama is going throughout the worlds. The soul goes up and up until it reaches the heights.
בני, עד כמה אתה חושב שהתיאוריה של פרופסור גרשום שולם נכונה במה שאמר שהחסידות רצה להרחיק את הכסיפה של ביאת משיח?
יפה, neutralization of messianism, as he called it, neutralizing the idea of Mashiach. That's as Gershom Sholom's thesis. He said that actually the tzaddik is a replacement for the Mashiach. You don't need a Mashiach when you have the tzaddik. And he said, Gershom Sholom as well, that Hasidism comes after the Sabbatianism, Shabtaut, and its crisis, and it gives you a replacement. You don't need to attach yourself to a Messiah, and you got a redemption already in this world with a tzaddik. There's a great argument about this thesis. I don't agree with it. Basically, there's much force in that. But the fact is that, and by the way, already in the lifetime of Gershom Sholom, there was the absolutely different analysis of Professor Dinu, Ben-Zion Dinu, who said Hasidism is a messianic movement. It's another means to bring the Mashiach. And we see in this text that what the Baal Shem Tov is about bringing the Mashiach. The entire Hasidic project is bringing the Mashiach in new means. So I believe that basically Hasidism is not something different about its ideology of Mashiach and Mashiachiyot, Messianism. It's just traditional as it was before. It doesn't change much. It's not more messianic. It's not less messianic. It's about a traditional movement in that sense. Okay, so now I see that it's a little late, so we have to advance a little in time and go a little further. When the Maggid of Mezrich becomes the main leader of the Hasidic movement, he sends or enables his students to go throughout Eastern Europe, and they establish new centers of Hasidism. Now he gives them a kind of free leadership or free mandate to disperse Hasidism in their way, and each one of them has his own accent, has his own emphasis, has his own primary values. They're all about reaching Dvekut. They all want to attach themselves to God. They're all kinds of mystical figures, but each one of them has its own emphasis. Now, what are the different, and by the way, the Maggid of Mezrich himself has also his emphasis as well in the path of Hasidism. But if we go a little further, to source number 5, there is much later in the 20th century, a famous Rebbe who said, actually, the Rebbe of Piaseczny is known for his Holocaust sermons, very saintly person, very impressive person. He said, actually, in Hasidism, there are 2 ways. One way is Chabad, and the other way is Karlin. What is Chabad? What is Karlin? Both of them want to get the Dvekut, the attachment to God. But Chabad says that the attachment to God is through understanding God. And Karlin says that the attachment to God is through feeling God, I would say even physically, not through the intellect, but through the body. And this is altogether a different way to Hasidism. And let's read a little bit of Hasidic text about that. Shneor Zalman Miladi said, okay, this one I'll summarize myself. Shneor Zalman Miladi says, Shneor Zalman Miladi is the founder of Chabad Hasidism. He says, in order to reach the dvekut, you have to understand whom you want to touch, whom you want to connect yourself to. Now, the idea is that in the upper worlds, the divine light goes through Chokhmah, Binah, Vedat, and then to other attributes of God. The same way I said it should go in human soul. It first has to go from the upper to the lower. Upper is the intellect, Chokhmah, Binah, Vedat.
אתה יכול לחזור עוד פעם? יש קצת...
כן.
יש קצת...
כן, רק רגע פה. למה זה קרה, אסף? אוקיי. כן, רק שנייה. עכשיו יותר טוב?
כן, כן.
כן. אז he says that in the upper worlds, the divine light goes through sphirot that are called Chokhmah, Binah, Vedat, and then to the lower sphirot, from the upper to the lower. The same way should go with human beings. The understanding of God should go from the upper part to the lower part. The upper part is the mind, the intellect. It has to go to Chokhmah, understanding God, Binah, which is expanding our knowledge of God. Vedat, that means to internalize this knowledge and make it work on other parts of our behavior. And only then, after you understand God and expand the knowledge and internalize the knowledge, it goes through your more emotional parts of your, which is the lower part of the body, the heart, and the other parts of the body. This is how you feel the love of God, the fear of God. All those emotions should be derived from your understanding of what is God. First, you understand that God is everything, and God is melokol, and everything that you see is just a manifestation of God. And then you can be loving God, you can be fearing God, you can be happy with God. Everything, if you want to be really loving God or fearing God, you first have to understand who is it that God that you love? Who is that God that you fear? So you have to first the first step is understanding, and only then you can be emotional. Karlin is the absolute opposite of that way. Karlin says you first have to feel, then sometimes it's really good you can understand. Why? Because the understanding of God is much, much behind us, beyond us. It's too big for us. So first you have to make your body feel God in the most physical sense. You have to kind of compel yourself to be happy with dancing, to be happy with communicating with your friends, to be happy with to move during prayer, to shout during prayer. All those physical means to feel God in the bottom of your heart. Only then you can understand something. So the way of Chabad is starting from intellect and moving to emotion, and the way of Karlin is starting from emotion and sometimes, not always, moving to the intellect, to understanding. These are the two main paths of Hasidism according to the Piasetzner. But actually, it's a little schematic, because the path of what he calls the path of Karlin has many variations in other Hasidic groups as well. And actually, there are many variations. Chabad is sui generis. Chabad is a type of its own. And since its early times, Chabad is really different from all the Hasidic groups. But Karlin is not the only one that is not Chabad, and there are other variations in the other side as well. One of them is, for example, and by the way, we already in that time, Karlin was critical of Chabad, and there is a famous, not famous, but a text by the second Rebbe of Karlin, third Rebbe of Karlin, who really criticizes Chabad. They don't understand really much, but they behave like, philosophers who understand everything, and it's wrong. We have to put the emphasis on feeling rather than on understanding. But as I said, but there are other variations as well. One of them, which is very famous, and most of you probably know, is Breslev. what's special about Breslev, of Nachman of Breslev? What's special about Breslev is indeed closer to Karlin, but it's an absolutely different atmosphere, because Karlin is really about happiness and joy and physical, and in Breslev you always feel the confrontation, the coping with the darkness in the world. In Reb Nachman, it's not that you can be easily happy, easily joyous. It's not easy. You have to fight for that, because each and every step of in the world, you see darkness, you see wars, you see things you have to fight against. And Reb Nachman's doctrine is full of those explanations of how a person has to fight he calls it many obstacles on this path to God. And one of the famous pieces, this is a famous piece, that he says that you often feel, he says, that you're far from God. This is how God behaves with. He sends us a feeling that we're far, we can't reach him, so we'll get despaired. And despair, says Reb Nachman, is the greatest enemy. So you have to overcome the despair. Once again, fight against the despair, Yeush. And even then, how do you fight your despair? You think you're all bad. No, you're not all bad. You have to find a small point of goodness in you so that you can hold that. And from that point, you can start being happy with yourself and then being happy with God. And then he says, yes, that even a small change that you can make in yourself is a great thing in the eyes of God. And he says, and here is the text, ודע שכל התנועות והעתקות שאתה מתנהלת בכל פעם באיזה מעט מן הגשמיות לעבודתו יתברך, כולם מתקבצים ומתחברים ומתקשרים ובאים לעזרתך בעת הצורך. דהיינו, כשיש חס ושלום, איזה דוחק ועת צרה, חס ושלום. All those small changes that you can hold a little light in yourself, which is a little light that you can find that you overcome the physical world, the physical drives, the physical instincts, and made yourself closer to God. All those small points and small changes, they gather together and they help you come through and they help you get further on. And here he says, ודע שהאדם צריך לעבור על גשר צר מאוד מאוד, והכלל והעיקר שלא יתפחד כלל. This is not an optimistic view of the world. This is not a Hasidic optimism. האדם צריך לעבור על גשר צר מאוד מאוד, very small, very narrow bridge. You have to go. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, the famous songs. This is where it's taken from. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד. The entire is a very narrow bridge. Now, if you start fearing and despairing, you fall down. It's a very narrow bridge. What's the way to pass that bridge? לא לפחד כלל. Not to fear, and go through it with courage, gain strength, and go through it. This is the only way you can pass through it and get to the other side. And how do you do that? In the rest of the section, he says, somebody can't really feel that you can do it because you can't really feel happy. How do you force yourself to be happy? He says it's physical. You force yourself, even if you're not happy.
אתה יכול להתרחק קצת מהמיקרופון, זה נקטע.
Even if you're not happy, start dancing, start singing, start jumping, and you'll put yourself into happiness, into gladness. This is the way to do it. It's a kind of behavioristic way to make yourself happy. אחרי המעשים נמשכים הלבבות. So this is an absolutely different way from Chabad. It's also different from Karlin. It's closer to Karlin, but it's still different because it's very pessimistic and it's bottom. You have to reach this simcha only by overcoming many obstacles, which is a very central emphasis in Breslev. And there is another way of Hasidism, which is the way of Ortodoxia Judía, a very famous, once again, Hasidic book, also known as Sgula, for women that are in delivery and giving birth to a child in the Chadar Leida. When women often take this book because it's good for easy delivery, Leida Kala. But Rabbi Melech Oblizhensk says that the main idea in which you can really try to attach yourself to God is the tzaddik. Now, the tzaddik is not only about spiritual guidance, as we thought before. In Rabbi Melech Oblizhensk's theory, the tzaddik is also about bringing, once again, material. It's called material tzaddik. Tzaddik is material life, material abundance. If you have a problem with family, if you have a problem problem with parnasa, with livelihood, if you have a problem with bringing children to the world, yes, fertility, all those problems are things chaye bane mezone. Yes, according to the Gemara, it depends on luck. According to Rabbi Eliezer, what is luck? It's not luck. It's the Hasid, it's the Tzaddik's work in the upper worlds to bring this material abundance to our world. And if you attach yourself to the Tzaddik, you attach yourself to this abundance as well. So this is also part of the Hasid's duty, to attach himself to this Tzaddik in order to make the Tzaddik help him, even in material things, not just in spiritual guidance. So already in the third generation, just let's understand, yes, Baal Shem Tov is first generation, the Magi is second generation, all of these figures which we've read now, Rav Shaul Zalman Miladi, Rav Aaron Mikarlin, Rabbi Eliezer Milishensky, Rabbi Nachman Breslev is the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, great-grandson, great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, fourth generation, is living in the same period. All of them already give us a plurality of paths within Hasidism. They all agree about the Hasidic message, but different variations, different variants of Hasidism already developed in the third generation. So, questions?
Yes. אפשר? רגע.
בבקשה.
כן. על מה שאמרת, דבר אחד מרב אליעזר, בדיוק ראיתי במכתבים של בעל התניא, שהוא טוען לתלמידים שלו, למה באים לשאול אותי על ענייני פרנסה וכל העניינים האלו? זאת אומרת, הוא בדיוק, וזה מוזר שדווקא חב"ד, הכל שואלים לרב. זה מכתב שהוא כתב שבעל התניא. יש לך אולי איזה הסבר על זה? זה בדיוק נגד מה ש...
רבי אברהם is asking how that there is a letter by בעל התניא, it's Igeret HaKodesh 22, if I'm not, if I'm I think. He says, why are you coming here to ask for parnasa, to livelihood, to ask for physical things, material things? I'm not about that. I'm material things. And the Bible says it's exactly the opposite. First of all,
לא נשמע, עכשיו כן.
It is exactly the opposite of the doctrine of Rabbi Elimelech. That's you're certainly right about that. And you're also asking another question: how did it come up that Chabad Hasidism also comes to the Rebbe to ask for parnasa, to ask for children, to ask for things like that? Yes, if you read the simple answer is that Chabad changed. Chabad is not the same as in Baal HaTanya, and the Rebbe's of Chabad later actually went a little closer to Rabbi Elimelech, if not the whole way. But how do they explain that? So I once had this fascinating conversation with a Chabadnik. I asked him the same questions. Baal HaTanya says here that I'm not about material things.
No, we can hear again. Sorry.
Benny, אפשר לחזור עוד פעם?
Okay, so I asked the Chabadnik, how do you explain that? It's not what your rabbis do. Your rabbis do help you with material things, with parnasa, with economy, with children, things like that. And Baal HaTanya says that it's not the role of the Rebbe. So he said to me, it's apologetic, okay? It's not the pshat. He said, read the letter carefully. What the Baal HaTanya says, it's not the duty of the rabbi, so don't turn to me, it's the duty of the prophet, like Shmuel the prophet that helped Shaul with the donkeys, you see? So he said, the rabbis of Chabad are not just rabbis, they are nevi'im, they are prophets. So they handle also the material questions as well. So, and there's by the way, a talk, a shmuz, a sicha of the Lubavitcher Rebbe who says more or less this thing, a sicha called Shoftim V'Shotrim. You can see that in the Lubavitcher's teachings, yes. That the rabbis of Chabad are like nevi'im, so they also discuss material things.
אבל למה בעל התניא אמר על עצמו שהוא לא יכול אם הוא נביא?
אז לא, he didn't see himself as Navi, but he sees himself as such. Okay, so... כן.
מאיפה לקח הבעל שם טוב, או אני לא יודע אם הבעל שם טוב, נועם אלימלך, הרעיון של להידבק עם הצדיק? כאילו, ממה שאמר המשיח אמר שכולם יגיעו למדרגה של הבעל שם טוב.
נכון.
והם הבינו שלהידבק עם הצדיק, הם יוכלו להגיע לזה.
יפה. אז בעניין הזה יש אמרות, there are sayings by the בעל שם טוב that when you can't get the divine light by yourself and you attach yourself to a person who did get the divine light, you go through him. But the later Hasidism, or not so late, in the early 19th century, they coined a very nice sentence to that, a sentence from the Mishnah. Now, you should, before I say this sentence, you should all know that Hasidic interpretation of the Bible and the Mishnah is far, far off the Pshat. Don't expect the Pshat, okay? It's far, it's the most creative and most virtuoso interpretation that ever existed in Judaism is the Hasidic one. Okay, so they took the Mishnah in Masechet Kelim, saying, Kol ha-mechubar le-tahor, tahor. So the holy Jew of Pshischa said, Kol ha-mechubar le-tahor, tahor, what is it? Yes, in Tumat Kelim, yes, if you whatever is connected to the pure vessel is also pure. Yes, if you put if something is connected to the pot and you put the pot in the mikveh, so the thing that is connected is also pure, the same is here. Something is connected to the tzaddik. If someone is connected to the tzaddik and the tzaddik is pure, he also becomes pure. That's a kind of drasha to justify this move. Okay, you understood it?
סליחה, one hard and brief. Don't you see this point, this cosmovision dangerous to the Jewish people? This role of the tzaddik, of the rabbis, is not quite dangerous to the free will, because the role of the tzaddik and the rabbi doesn't reform all the basic roots of the Judaism, that God is one, omnipotent, which is the real role of the tzaddik, is an intermediary.
Now this is exactly the point in which we have to go to the mitnagdim, because that's one of the things the mitnagdim say, the misnagdim. As soon as the Hasidim started to become a mass movement and got into the masses of Eastern European Jewry, there are people who already started opposing them and say it's a very dangerous path, a very dangerous path. And you would be probably among them, Gina, one of the mitnagdim, I guess. And in the beginning, the main leader of the mitnagdim was not just, a small rabbi, it was the Gaon of Vilna. He himself, yes, there was once again a scholarly argument. Was he active? Was he passive? He probably was active. He initiated the greatest struggle against the Hasidim already. As soon as 1772, we'll see the text. Here it is. The Kehila of Vilna, the community of Vilna, exerted a cherem against the Hasidim, excommunication against the Hasidim. I won't read all the text. It's a very flowery Hebrew. It's very, not easy Hebrew, but they say they took all the young people from the Batei Midrash, from the study houses, and they went to the tzaddikim instead of learning Torah. They left the city. They don't pray in time because they have to all the time prepare themselves to prayer, so they pray late. And when they pray, they shout and move. And they go to gather together outside the community, outside the shul, and we don't know what they do there. And they're all the time in a kind of simcha, but they call it holelut. Holelut is something, that's a little wild. They get wild with their singing and jumping and dancing all the time. And they don't repent their sins because they say that repentance is sadness, and sadness is bad. And all the time they smoke their pipes. The Rebbe says they smoke their pipes and pray without any order. All those accusations, and also that they interpret the Torah absolutely in absolutely virtuoso way, far away from the pshat. All those accusations made us gather here. They say the heads and masters of the Vilna Kehila, and above all the Gaon of Vilna, and we decided to excommunicate them and persecute them until they do not exist anymore. Really very harsh excommunication. But this is, I would say, the violent stage of the fight against the Hasidim. The violent stage of really, in which also they told about them to the authorities, and the government imprisoned twice Reb Shneur Zalman of Vladi, things really terrible things, and there were violent fights within the communities. But one generation after the Gaon of Vilna passed away, it was 1797, his disciple, his student, Reb Chaim Volozhin, became the main figure in the Misnagdim's camp. And Reb Chaim Volozhin understood that Hasidism is not a movement of heresy, is not a movement of anti-halachic movement as the Gaon of Vilna understood them. The Gaon of Vilna also suspected they're kind of Shabtaim, Sabbateans, kind of Shabtai Tzvi's variants. And Reb Chaim Volozhin, his pupil, understood that it's not about Sabbateanism, it's not about anti-halachic movement, but they're wrong. He understood, he also believed that they were wrong. And one of the things he said they were wrong is in theology, in this theological aspect, there is no way to bridge the gap between man and God. Man is there, God is there, mystical experience is an illusion, because you can't really dissolve the gap between man and God. So what is our way, Reb Chaim Volozhin asks, to get to get as closer as we can to God? We don't get God himself, we only have God's word. God's word, what is it? Torah. The Torah. So the only way you can attach to God is not through mystical experiences, through the Torah. And through Torah study, understanding of the Torah, and through the practice of the Torah, by the mitzvot. The Torah is our best attachment to God. This is what Chaim Volozhin said. But in a very interesting section that people, from some reason, I don't know why people don't know it, in his book Nefesh HaChaim, he says exactly what you say, Gina, that actually, according to the halacha, anything that we attach, to which we attach instead of attaching to God, and this mitzvot, of course, is avodah zarah, is idolatry, is paganism. And therefore, he says, even if the Hasidim say that we use the tzaddik only as a mediator to God, if there is a mediator, it's kind of avodah zarah, and it's a very harsh passage within his book Nefesh HaChaim. He says that's actually what Hasidism is deteriorating into. He's not about excommunicating, it's not about cherem. He says that people wish to be close to God, but this is the wrong way. And what Reb Chaim Volozhin is best known for is this book, Nefesh HaChaim, but another thing as well. He's the founder of the Volozhin Yeshiva, the first Litvish yeshiva, the first yeshiva litait, which actually got through a very sophisticated means of actually sending or enabling Jewish young people from all the communities to go to Volozhin and study there, and the different communities were financing them in the Volozhin Yeshiva. He made the most important Torah center in Eastern Europe at that time, which was the meeting place of all the great minds, yes, of the young people who went to study there, Torah Lishma, because this is the best way to be attached to God, not through mystical experience, not through rabbis. Sit and study as much as you can and be the best you can in Torah. That's the best attachment to God, according to Chaim Volozhin.
בני, אתה חושב שרב חיים מוולוז'ין עשה את הישיבה כדי ללחום נגד תנועת החסידות, או היה חלק מהכוונה שלו, או מהמטרות?
According to some scholars, he established a Volozhin Yeshiva in order to fight Hasidism and offer an alternative. But we have the notice that he made when he opened the Ortodoxia Yeshiva, you see that he only, slightly mentions, doesn't mention Hasidism, but slightly mentions the deterioration of the generation, which is probably because of Hasidism. But the Bible says that we don't have a good institution for Torah learning. So, and that is true because the yeshivot were deteriorating in the 18th century, and he wants to get it back and to have a good Torah center. That's what was missing in the period, even without Hasidism. So it's both Hasidism and the educational condition on the whole.
I have one question.
Yes.
How was a mystical experience defined, and how do we get to that?
It's a very difficult question because there are hundreds of definitions to mystical experience. Gershom Scholem said they found more than 200, and since then there are even more. But the definition we give in this sense is that you have an immediate attachment to the divine, to the supernatural, which is felt not only intellectually, but even more emotionally and in your entire feeling. It's something that really makes you feel in the most intimate way close or attached to the supernatural, to God or to divine forces. That's the best experience in this respect.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Yes, please.
מעניין מאוד שהיום גם הליטאים עושים כמעט כמו החסידים. או המשכי של מבשח או...
נכון. האמת היא שגם החסידים... Now that we have only a few minutes, I'll say it in short. During the 19th and 20th century, the Hasidim and the Misnagdim made peace, more or less peace between them, because they had a much more dangerous enemy to fight, which is, as we said, Haskalah, modernism, secularism. They were all fighting together, shoulder to shoulder against the real enemies. So they made peace with one another. But they don't only make peace, this century, adopted a few patterns that we know from Hasidism, which is the admiration of the rabbis, the great rabbis, and even if we see go to study to get his blessing, to get his guidance, his order, and were influenced by the Hasidim, but almost equally interesting, even much more interesting, is the opposite experience, the opposite influence. Sorry, how the Hasidim, how the Litaim went to another influenced by the Hasidim, and how the Litaim influenced Hasidim were influenced by the Litaim. One thing that we should know, that during the 19th century, the Hasidim left the idea of mystical experience almost totally. And most of them went also to Torah study and established yeshivot, like the Litaim. They were influenced by the Litaim. And they became much more traditional and much more bound to the halacha, and much less, even if they pray a little late, most of them keep the halacha and are strict observers of the halacha, which was not exactly so in the 18th century. So in that respect, the Litaim influenced the Hasidim. In other respects, as you said, admiration of the rabbis, the Hasidim influenced the Litaim. But the most interesting, and this is something I would like to talk a little more, but we have only 5 minutes, is the influence that was indirectly exerted by the Hasidim on Litaim, which is Tnuat HaMusar, the Musar movement. During the 19th century, after the Volozhin Yeshiva was successful, and many Talmidei Chachamim came out of the Volozhin Yeshiva, the Litaim within themselves felt that something was missing. And that missing thing was, yes, what they often called Yirat Shamayim, but not in the sense of Yirat Shamayim, just fear of God. They felt that we made excellent scholars, excellent minds, excellent, brilliant intellectuals. But something is missing in the literature yeshiva with regard to educational, emotional shaping of the person. How do you not make a person not only a good intellectual, but also a good Jew? Now, Reb Chaim Volozhin had the answer. If you learn Torah Lishma, you also become a good Jew. But how do you make a person to learn Torah Lishma? So one of the students of Reb Chaim Volozhin was a Jew by the name of Reb Zunel Misalant, Reb Zunel of Salant, a small place called Salant. He said it's not enough to study Gemara and Halacha. We also have to study Musar. Musar, but not intellectually studied Musar books. Musar is what we know as Musar books. Chovot HaLevavot, Orchot Tzadikim, Mesilat Yesharim, all those books. But Musar books you don't study like Gemara and Halacha. You don't study intellectually. You have to study emotionally. You have to repeat the words of the Musar book. You have to ask yourself, where am I standing in relation to these ideas of Musar? You read about Anava. Am I Anav? Am I modest? You read about Zrizut. Yes, not being lazy, being quick and diligent. Am I diligent? You read about Kas, anger. Am I angry? All those things you have to apply to yourself. And study Musar is a kind of healing to that. But he only implemented it to himself, Rabbi Zundel of Salant. But then to his city came another young man called Rabbi Israel of Salant, Rabbi Israel Lipkin. He is the founder of the Musar movement. Now, within the Litvish world of the Misnagdim, a student of Reb Chaim Volozhin, Reb Sol Salanter says, I totally believe that Torah learning is very important, is the most important thing. But there is only one thing that is equally important, not more important, equally important, which is Yirah or Tikkun HaMidot, rectification of the traits, self-emendation, education. And this you do through the Musar books. And what Zundel of Salant did for himself, he made Israel of Salant, or Israel Salanter, turned it into a movement and first established Musar study houses, and it didn't succeed. And then later he started transforming the Musar into a yeshiva educational program. And already in his life, a few yeshivot were established where they didn't study only Gemara and Halacha, but also Musar. And there was also a figure within the yeshiva, which is the Mashgiach, who didn't teach Gemara, but taught Musar and taught the person also how to educate himself and rectify himself. Now, this movement really changed the yeshivot, Litvish yeshivot, into a place of not just study Gemara, but also study how to shape yourself as a Jewish person, as a Jewish personality. Since that message infiltrated into Litvish yeshivot, it's not like Hasidic yeshivot, not at all. But it's not just Torah, only Torah as the old Misnagdic way demanded, but there are also kinds of different spiritual guidances within the yeshivot as well. Now, after the passing of Profesor Salanter, like every Jewish movement, once again, variances, differences, from a very pessimistic point of view of the Novardox stream within the Musar movement to the very optimistic view of the Slobodka stream within the Musar movement. And just as in Hasidism, we've got different trends of Hasidism, different interpretations of the Hasidic message, the same happened with the Musar movement, in which different streams, different trends interpreted the message of Musar, of Profesor Salanter, and it flourished, especially until the Holocaust, and a little bit even today in Litvish yeshivot.
זה היה משהו לכתחילה?
Sorry?
זה היה משהו לכתחילה?
כן.
או שאחרי שקשה מאוד ללמוד תורה לשמה, אז לכן, כאילו, במקום זה, אז צריכים ללמוד מוסר.
Okay, Baruch is asking if it was something that was intentional as a first priority, or only since they discovered that they can't really make everyone learn Torah Lishma, they made a kind of compromise. No, it wasn't a compromise, because Profesor Salanter said that if I want to make a good Jew, I'm asking myself, what's the way to do that? Actually, we all believe that the Torah is saint, is holy, and we all believe that the Torah gives us the right advices for life. So why do people not observe it? So he answers, we believe in it, but we don't make the proper things to have this belief influence our actions. And what the Profesor Salanter tries to do is not just for Torah learners, but for everybody, to make our belief influential, affect our lives, our practical lives. And that is something that doesn't belong to the fact that, and here he says, you can't, it's not something that Torah can help, because Torah can help things that you can, Torah can help you be aware of the halachot. Torah can make you be more dedicated to intellectual purposes. But some things, he says, are not about that. For example, the things that we don't, you don't even understand what's the Yetzer Hara behind them. Why do people have Yetzer Hara to say bad things, to gossip, to say Lashon Hara? It's not something that they have a ta'ava to it, they have are eager to do. So it's not something that Torah learning can help against. Torah learning can help against things that, you know, that you can understand that it's something supernatural that, Torah can help against things that you have to put your mind into more spiritual things. But in other things, you can't help that with Torah. So you have to educate yourself, and educate yourself through Musar books, and change your midot, your traits, which is much deeper things. That something that not even Torah learning cannot do completely. It's a kind of accomplishment or completing the work of the Torah learning. You have to both study Torah and do something else, which is Musar and Tikkun HaMidot. Okay, so I think we got to the end of the show. So thank you very much. I put much in this 1 hour and a half. If I have more questions, I'm staying here for a few minutes. So thank you.
בני, יש לי שאלה לגבי מה הקשר והיחס בין תנועת המוסר לתנועת החסידות?
שאלה טובה. The relation between Musar and Hasidut, actually, they both agree on the fact that it's not enough to study Torah and fulfill the mitzvot. It's not enough, you need something more. But what is that other thing that you need? This is already under a machloket, controversy. Because Hasidism is about community and tzaddik and joy and gladness and optimism. And Musar is basically individualistic. You have to cope with your own personality. And you don't do it with guidance, because you face your challenges yourselves. And community is not central at all in Musar. It's not a matter of community. So absolutely different, and it's pessimistic. Basically, Musar is not optimistic, it's pessimistic. So it's absolutely different way. So in later stages of Musar movement, there were Hasidic influences. There were Hasidic influences on the Musar of Tels, and other Hasidic influences, Chabad influences on the Musar of Tels, and other influences on the Musar of Lomje, on different schools of Musar. But this came later. The basic message of Musar is not Hasidic optimism, but much more individualistic, coping with your personality.
מה חשבו החסידים לגבי לימודי חול ומודרניזציה?
כולם היו, they're all against modernity in different types. And during the 19th century, what happened is that the Hasidim that were started off as a revolutionary movement, they became more conservative than Litvayim in many aspects.
And the role of the women. And the role of the women to the Hasidim.
The role of women is interesting, yes. Hasidism didn't give much room to women. Actually, in most of the Hasidic groups, women are not really going to the Rebbe and ask the Rebbe's guidance. It's the man who goes, and he can tell the woman, and the woman has their own role around the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe's wife, but it's not the same as being a Hasid of the Rebbe. So there was only one Hasidic women tzadika, which was the Ludmira Moed, the Virgin of Ludmir. And soon after she became a leader, another Rebbe actually convinced her to give it up, and she made an aliyah to Eretz Israel and passed away as almost anonymous person. That was almost, there are a few other women as well, but no special women leaders, not famous women leaders as the main one. So see you next week. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kol tov, bye.
Thank you very, very much.
Semana que entra a todos, gracias. Gracias a todos. Bye.